Hi, my name is Ethan Patterson, and today I will be talking about my paper, Detroit Combating Abandonment. People often look at a city and see why they are willing to move to a location and what that location offers, but today we're actually going to look at a city who people have been fleeing by the masses. They've been abandoning this location, and this location is the city of Detroit. Detroit was thriving throughout the 20th century with reaching populations in 1950 of 1.86 million individuals. This is a phenomenal accomplishment that's been created by industrialization in the Ford Motor Company and the assembly line. According to FactFinder, in 2018, the U.S. Census reported that 672,681 people are currently living in Detroit today. This has been a steady decline from the 1950s, but over the recent years, we're going to look over the additional steps and reasons why people are moving. In the 2000 U.S. Census, the average median age was 30.9 years old. Just 17 years later, this changed to 34.7 years old, and the predominant makeup was African Americans by a wide margin in 2010, and that has slowly declined in 2017 with Caucasians having more of a presence and more populace in Detroit, while still being a great minority on population size of Caucasians. This has still been an increase in the total percentage of Caucasians to the percentage of African Americans. With the younger populace moving away from the city of Detroit, it's important to understand why they are moving and where they are moving to. Flow Mapper with the U.S. Census shows that the most condensed movements are actually to the surrounding counties of Detroit. People are also moving to the rest of Michigan, southern Florida, and southeast California. People are moving due to different reasons. One is because the local housing is extremely underdeveloped and habitable due to neglect, and then they're also moving because the ability to increase their living standards with different jobs and just better housing in other locations. When people move from Detroit, we must look at what economists say should be done with this lagging economy. To look at this, you break it down into two different viewpoints. One is place-based policies, and the other one is people-based policies. These policies are often very expensive with place-based. They're typically expected to deliver two types of benefits. One is direct, which will improve which is a transport improvement that will save vehicles and operating costs, as an example. And the other one is indirect. This transportation improvement may induce private sector investment, create jobs, and increase productivity among these individuals. And this was found from the University of Oxford from Professor Duranton and Venables. We also have to look at the spiral effect that centralized growth can come about from these policies. With these policies, what will end up happening is they'll focus on a certain location and benefit there. So in this case, it's downtown Detroit. Downtown Detroit has been greatly increased and greatly seen that growth of the past years, but it's come at the cost of the surrounding areas. The surrounding areas have not seen improvement at all, and we're continuing to see the neglect among them. And to combat this, what they stated was we actually have to have, it shows the importance of being transparent and straightforward about where the growth is expected to come about. Second, we're going to look at people-based policies, which focus on individuals or households to increase the overall wealth. This can be in the form of tax policies, low-income housing, low-income affordable health care. According to the World Development Report and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, these policies should only be used in complementary to place-based policies. The World Development Report stated that economic development is intimately bound with sectoral and spatial transformations. They later go on to discuss each factor of efficient and well-regulated markets of labor, land, and goods that must be adapted to each sector and determined by the distance and density of each location. Now we're going to look at a couple of Detroit's policies and break them down just to see what their successes are and or what their failures have come about them. And that way we can understand what the city of Detroit is trying to do and how we can better understand the situation they are and how to combat this. First, we're going to look at infrastructure and local housing. Infrastructure is something that's key to every location, no matter what it is, from the biggest city in the world to the littlest and smallest towns you can think of. Infrastructure is a key. The city of Detroit is actually trying to combat this by modifying how gas taxes are calculated to raise over $1 billion to fix state roads and make strategic infrastructure improvements. And this was stated by the Detroit Chamber in their 2014 November Advocacy and Action Report. So this is something that they're advocating for and how to improve, and so that the people of Detroit can take this and grow and improve the city. And throughout this, there's actually been a lot of controversy. So these reports have been maintained and they've approved this, but it's actually being shut down by local congressmen or local government officials. So they can't actually create the much needed revenue to improve this infrastructure. In March of 2016, the Detroit Regional Chamber met with members of Congress in Washington, D.C. to talk about energy reform and transportation infrastructure changes. The following months, the Senate passed energy reforms to create efficient energy technology in homes, schools, commercial, and federal buildings. Often, Detroit focuses on infrastructure to create growth, but it's commonly being stopped by members of the government due to their desire to create policies that meet their agenda and not the immediate support to grow infrastructure within the city. This is a major problem and something that needs to be changed. Now, we'll talk about that later on once I introduce my policies or my suggested policies on how we combat this problem and create that long-term economic growth for and gain for Detroit. Second, we're going to talk about is the housing policies. So housing policies is something that battles their problem with housing. And Detroit's housing problem is existential. It's incredible how neglected it's been. So what the city of Detroit is doing is they actually aren't really doing much. I couldn't find anything where they're specifically combating this housing problem. They did. I did find one location where they are creating a fund where you can actually demolish the apartments or the complexes of Detroit, but there's not being any growth after that. They're just taking apart of those buildings that have been run down and neglected, but they aren't stepping past that. And now we're going to discuss the tax policies. The tax policies for the local residents and the businesses. So the income tax for Detroit is 1.2% for non-residents and 2.4% for residents. They also don't have a local sales tax in the city of Detroit, with just using the standard 6% for the state of Michigan. This can create problems because there's no additional revenue created for these necessary programs that are needed to promote growth and economic sustainability in the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit for businesses does provide tax incentives for businesses to enter into a location such as the economic development zones or the Renaissance zones, and they created a waiver of income and utility user taxes for people who live in the area, own property, or conduct business within these zones, and they are not delinquent on any of their local, county, or state taxes. And now for the growth of Detroit to sustain a long economic gains, we must revitalize the economy. And we also have to create a desirable location for people to invest their labor, land, and want to invest in the market of Detroit. So one thing that I decided that we needed to do was we must create a detailed and attainable list of goals to accomplish. First, I decided that we needed to we have to have efficiently utilization of labor, land, and market resources which are unique to the city of Detroit. For this, for the land, we must create a livable and desirable housing surrounding the major downtown area and the suburbs. For the market, we must efficiently utilize the local commodity development and infrastructure markets to promote a competitive market. A lot of these markets aren't competitive. They're either completely government owned or they're just lacking in themselves. For the labor, we must create sustainable jobs that promote growth, education, and learning to the citizens of Detroit. We have to invest in the people of Detroit to further the city of Detroit, because with the labor market lacking and the inability to promote within and promote the city of Detroit, we'll never have the economic growth that needs to be sustained for that long-term goals. Next, we need to increase the revenue of Detroit's government with strict management and overview from economists, social engineers, and city planners. So the revenue that we're sitting at, what the government is using right now for the city of Detroit, is just inadequate. We have to increase that while maintaining a strict understanding that, hey, these funds have to be used for the right causes. Traditionally, the city of Detroit, they'll have mismanagement of funds, which is unacceptable for that growth. For the city planners, they need to communicate the importance of following and listening to the advice of economists and civil engineers. They have to understand that, hey, the people who specialize in these jobs in the economy and civil planning, in civil engineers, they understand the numbers behind it. They understand what will grow and how it will grow. And they also need to advocate for federal aid to create growth and resources while finding an equilibrium for the distribution of funds. For the economists, they need to create an attainable short-term and long-term policies which efficiently utilize the resources they have. For civil engineers, they have to stabilize the infrastructure and opportunities to create jobs and a desirable, livable community in the lagging areas, such as the surrounding areas of the downtown. And for number 3, we need to ensure the working relationships with politicians for the good of Detroit. Politicians need to pass laws and changes that promote overall growth in infrastructure, economic development, and lagging communities. To accomplish these goals, major changes must happen in some areas. And some of these areas is they need to step away from their and take a humility check, and just so they don't put their personal agenda above the city of Detroit. The local government also needs to stop stopping the ability to make changes to promote growth and long-term economic gains. They must be willing to work bipartisan to pass bills such as tax reforms, infrastructure improvement, education improvement, and the housing state. For taxes, I suggest raising the corporate tax from 2% that it is now to 2.12%, while creating a flat rate of income of tax of 2% for the entire city of Detroit, both residents and non-residents. What this will do is it'll decrease the local residents' income tax, which will promote the ability to spend more money in the local economy, and then we'll also increase the non-residents' tax from 1.2% to 2%, which will save Detroit money because these people who live outside of the city of Detroit are taking money away from the city. And this will create a simpler, easier tax bracket so that people can understand, hey, this is for the city of Detroit. If you live in the city of Detroit, you'll actually have better infrastructure, a closer drive to work, you'll have a thriving economy, and it shows support for the people, the residents who currently live in Detroit. And then the corporate tax would also create revenue. So that revenue would increase the ability for infrastructure and different funds and attributes that we can improve on. But I also suggest that we should have exemptions. So these exemptions would be such as small business or these economic development zones. And so these development zones, we can still continue to have exemptions for 100% tax for these small Renaissance zones that are much needed for the businesses and the city and the people of Detroit. And then I would also have grants and funds to promote work with developers, builders, and workers to move into the surrounding neighborhoods. So what we see is a lot of times is there's no work between it. So you'll have a developer who says, hey, we should build 100 apartment complexes outside the city of Detroit, But the builders and the workers and the people who are moving into the city, there's no work between them and the local politicians where it can create that desirable location. And then one thing that we need to do is we also need to raise police in these neighborhoods. We need to increase our police presence and have somebody who also is passionate for the city who can work with the police on a local and community-based policing. Community-based policing is key to the individuals of Detroit, and also that relationship where people understand that the police are just there to help them. They want to keep them safe, and they're a public servant without taking advantage of police. They aren't using racial slurs. They aren't cussing them out. They aren't trying to fight them. They aren't trying to go against the police and using them as all the police are dirty and they're just rotten and there's no need for the police, but creating a bond between the two. And then for economic development, we must use place-based strategies to target poor and emerging neighborhoods that improve infrastructure, transportation, and the required functions that will help with people-based policies, such as those police and the health. We'll also include improvement on housing through funds and grants. I believe the local utilities should be investor-owned. So it creates a lower cost while maintaining profitability, but we also have that regulation. The city of Detroit can be as great as it once was during the 1950s, but this challenge isn't one to be taken lightly. With the policies added and amended, people must be held accountable. This is why the biggest part of changing Detroit is creating a board with members who are respected between both their peers and others in the specialties they have, and that also lead the city of Detroit through the hardship of changing habitats and promoting growth. I think this board should be comprised of local businessmen, some of the major businesses, the utility, police officers, treasury, city planners, civil engineers, economists, city council, local leaders, the education department, and the mayor's office. With this, you can look at it any way you want. So I recommended 40 members, but in reality, what it needs to be is there doesn't need to be a board, there just needs to be a mutual understanding that we have to work together for the growth and the improvement of Detroit. And this improvement is beyond anybody's imagination how much we can do. Because we've seen that 1.86 million people were once living in Detroit. And we can take that and we can promote that and we can go above and beyond that. We could push even more individuals in that and have a thriving economy in a desirable location for people to live. And with that, I want to thank you for your time and your patience for listening through this.